our neuroscientist, Brian MacVicar. So one of the first questions we're asking you, what comes up for you in your first encounter with the whole fabric of artworks?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for the lead up for that. I'd also just like to say I'm really honored to be here. So it's really terrific to participate in this dialogue between science and art. Just to point out that the three of us had met during an art gallery presentation at the UBC Gallery, where quite a well-known neuroscientist from over 100 years ago had drawings, the first drawings of the brain, and this transformed neuroscience. But it's very literal. It's a very literal interpretation of what he saw, and I appreciated at the time that the artists appreciate the art of the drawings. And so this exhibition is touring. So this started a dialogue. Our first introduction and a chance to talk about how the artists view these scientific drawings. And I was always been aware of the drawings from the power of the science. I always appreciate the beauty of the drawings. So it's a real honor to participate in this type of discussion. So my reaction to the art when I first saw it, I'm a biologist, a neuroscientist, and I was really curious how the artists would interact with a physicist because it's so mathematical and so abstract. As a biologist, I'm a user of physics. I haven't taken physics in years, but I appreciate the power of it, but I also realize it's quite abstract. So it deals with the universe, it deals with fundamental processes. So I was just really puzzled how this would be envisioned. So last night we had a tour, and I needed the explanation. I needed the context of the drawings. I thought this was quite useful for me to then picture the idea the artist had in terms of this representation. Now the first one, of course, by Elizabeth, that was simple. It was the antimatter equation, which I had to have explained to me, frankly. I don't remember Djavad's equation, but now I can see this is a very interesting representation, and it has a clarity of presentation relationship, and it has the fuzziness. This is a true insight to how people or physicists look upon the equation. So that was quite powerful. So some of the ones I was quite intrigued to see the progression from the first iteration of the first artist to the next one, and then the third one, where there wasn't a really clear link conceptually, I felt. And so, but once I had the illustrations pointed out, I may not remember, it's this anti-hydrogen sound, and then the wall, there's a drawing on the wall on wood by
Marina.
Okay, yes. I thought that had power, its own unique power. I didn't quite get the link, but I saw the relationship to the idea of the physics. And then the final one by Mimi, yes, Mimi. That was quite interesting in terms of how the power of science portrayed in a certain way in there. And so I'd be interested to hear their thoughts of the continuity of process between the drawings. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think each one had a unique presentation. I like the movie. It's the representation of time going backwards in physical representation. But I have to admit, I really appreciate the tour and the context, so that I could put this more in terms of the idea. I needed some help linking that idea to the original physics and the thought behind the painting.
Thank you. What is the idea of taking inspiration, that notion, taking inspiration, what is that on a neurological level? How does the brain respond to art, and how do we know this? Okay, so this is my opportunity to give you a little neuroscience 101 course. So just say I locked the doors. Just a couple of basic principles about how we look at that in the brain, and how this will then lead to the idea. I think you will appreciate. I heard this idea of connectivity of memories, of maybe the context of the memories. And I think this will come out after I describe this. We know that the brain has. You've seen the pictures of the brain. There's structure, very characteristic structure.
localization. So we know that sensory input here is from the touch, from the back is from the vision, down here is from the auditory input. And this is work that's known for a long time, from over maybe 100 years ago. But now we have a machine, it's called magnetic resonance imaging machines. You may have seen this in the hospital for other purposes, but it's possible to use a technique to map out what areas of the brain respond when you think more complex thoughts, or you have memories, or you are trying to do associations or planning. And recently, in the last couple of years, the math and the physicists have given the tools for the neuroscientists to start to look at how these areas are linked. Okay, so this is imaging on awake people that are doing tasks in a large magnet. It's a functional MRI. And it's possible then to see which areas respond most intensely to doing a task or a memory or a concept. And then now we can start to link them and say, well, what areas work together to do something? And out of this has come some really fascinating insights to how the brain works and how there are different clusters of areas that work together as a network. When they do a task, they all seem to be participating. So the first one, with respect to appreciating art, is an area called the default mode network. And this is the area, it's kind of in the midline of the brain, and it's a few deeper areas and back over here. They all start to be active. Other areas become calmer, and that default mode network, if you're daydreaming, if you're thinking about the past, thinking about yourself, or thinking more upon kind of more abstract thinking, not a task, thinking about almost daydreaming, maybe the best way to put it. This area is very active. And this is kind of thought to be when nothing else is going on, your default mode network is working. And in relationship to diseases, Alzheimer's, this is an area that's disturbed in Alzheimer's. This is an area very important for memories and recall. Okay, so that's the default mode network. And it turns out, I had to really look over what I'd say today, and it turns out that the default mode network is particularly active when people see art that they appreciate. This is really quite an intriguing fact I found out, is that there's a link between activating the default mode network and liking the art. And how do we interpret this? Just random thoughts. Maybe it has to do with you're seeing something that you respond to. You know, the brain responds to the visualization of the art, or hearing it, or maybe touching it. And it has to be in a context where you see the context and it stirs up your memories, and the default mode network is associating all these thoughts, and this is the area that seems to be correlated with liking art.
And then another question, the last question for you. Can you describe the impact of art and creativity from a neurological point of view?
Okay, so following up along that is the networks. This is a very hot area in neuroscience right now because the physics and the math is getting to the point where they can do the analysis of different networks. So after the discovery of the default mode network, turns out there's other systems. There was a very interesting paper just about 4 weeks ago from the lab at Harvard that I think is really relevant to this. It made a big splash. The default mode network is kind of daydreaming, maybe imagination, and there's another network that involves the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes up here are extremely important for planning. Teenagers, frontal lobes are developing during their teen years, and this is why a 16-year-old male in particular does risky behavior, and they realize by the time they're 25, if I do that, I'm going to get in trouble. This is development of the frontal lobes, looking at impact of events and stronger planning. So when you have a task and you're directed at work, maybe more, I think the term, use some terms that maybe are relevant to that. Then the frontal lobe, the executive control network is dominant. And so this is versus the daydreaming default mode, the executive motor control frontal executive control system is goal-directed in looking at future actions, future implications of actions now, and trying to do a task. Okay, so that turns out when that brain area is up, the other area is inhibited. So there's usually either or. You're either daydreaming or you're doing a task. And the third network, which is quite important in this work of creativity, is what's called salience. And salience is a term that people use to the value of something you see. You're thirsty, you just look at a glass of water, there's a lot of salience because you're thirsty, you're looking for water. Or the color red might have the salience because of your preference or your memories. And so this is the evaluation of what you like, what's important or what's bad. This is another network that controls the response to stimuli. Okay, so this latest work shows that most creative people, and this is creativity of artists, musicians, or scientists, it's a common aspect of creativity. It can be measured. This is interesting that if you give a person, for example, a wooden paper carton and a rope, and ask them to come up with as many uses of those two objects or a couple of objects, and then some other people will rate that. That's a creative idea, not just tying a box together. You know, it's just a creative use of common tools. It's kind of one measure of creativity, as well as other things like that. So to do that, it turns out the people most creative, they're most creative also in their life, doing, I'm sure everybody here would totally fulfill that criteria of being creative and come up with interesting combinations of memories. The three networks work together. So the kind of default motor control is kind of the daydreamer, and the task and the salience network have very strong connections. So there's lots of interconnectivity that they can map out using magnetic resonance imaging. And so I love this idea that came out of this imaging, is that you're using all these components. And we all, I don't know, but I'm sure everybody here has their own creative moments at certain circumstances. I often get most creative when I'm daydreaming. But then I have a feeling, that's a good idea. That'd be the salience component saying, this is a good idea. And then there has to be some task to actually test what's a good idea or not. So this is, I thought this might be appreciated in terms of the idea of how neuroscience is looking at the brain and how these different components, and really creative people, they're using all these components, and there are strong connections between the areas.
Thank you, that's amazing, and it also brings up an image of a very resonating kind of, if we could see each other's, what the energy that's being produced in those moments for complete interconnection. Very powerful. Thank you. We can allow for just a few questions right now from the audience, if you would like, and then we'll continue with the panelists. So if anyone has a question.
You were mentioning the default mode interplay when you look at art, and I'm wondering if when you appreciate music, if the default mode is what gets lit up as well.
Did everybody hear the question?
So the question is, during music, is the default mode activated? No, I wish I knew the precise answer to that. I'm sure I don't. But I know that there would be other areas involved with appreciating auditory stimulation. So I'm not exactly sure if the default mode is. Typically, if you're not getting intensely activated with sensory stimulation. So I don't think so, but I'd like that. I should look at it.
Just for context to my question, I'm aware that there's some recent research between psychology and dance looking at distributed creative cognition, when people are working together to create something and they work off one another. For the research that I'm thinking is to create a dance work. And I'm just wondering if there's any similar research about a topic like that in any kind of discipline in neuroscience where people are not just interacting with a work of art, but trying to have a creative process together and sort of working on one another. If you're aware of anything like that?
I'm aware of it's therapeutically, it's very good for people certain problems. Parkinson's disease, having dancing groups to music is extremely important therapy. It does activate these parts of the brain beyond the cortex or other areas being damaged. It resurrects the latent circuits that are making damage.
Alice, one more, and then we'll come back to other people later.
Hi. You mentioned that the default mode network becomes particularly active when people see art that they appreciate. I was wondering, do we know if that correlation also exists, but does it become particularly active when people make free association? And I'm particularly thinking maybe there's a link to what determines that maybe the works we like are works that allow us to make more free association.
That's a great thought. I would suspect that's true. I don't know if they really have the insight into that, but certainly it is a time when you're recalling memories. And memories, so that does there would be a resonance between seeing the art and responding to it with whatever experience you've had.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. She asked a similar question. I was curious about why you think what the relationship is between turning on the default network and the appreciation of art. So liking art, is it maybe a feedback loop where they're daydreaming so then they're liking the art more, and then if not, if that's maybe not the right track, how would you quantify somebody, how was it quantified? Somebody appreciate it?
Oh, that's a great question. I hesitate to have a real definitive answer to that because a lot of these things are subjective. And so I think the analysis is done as objectively as can be done. I think it's a correlational. So you have subjective statement that you like that, and you have also the default mode network is most active. So that would be the correlation. And it's true, it's also key with the person's own memories in the context of how that speaks to the own person.